Fernando Alonso seems to be one of those Formula 1 drivers who gets better and better no matter how old they get. And boy did he show this at the Brazilian Grand Prix over the weekend as he put together a truly incredible drive in a defensive masterclass as he held off Sergio Perez in the closing stages of the race to score an unbelievable podium. It was a drive and performance that quite rightly earned him a lot of praise on a weekend where Aston Martin returned to form after a difficult run of races, but has seen it slip down the order in the Constructors' Championship. So how did Fernando manage to pull off such an incredible drive to score a podium by holding off the quickest car on the grid that looked an impossible feat? Well, first things first, Aston has come off the back of a difficult couple of races in Austin in Mexico after it ran new upgrades but did not perform as expected, and saw it sort of chopping and changing between running the old spec car and the new spec upgrades to see which performed best. And it was clear in Mexico that when they ran these new upgrades, the car had lost its competitive edge and actually had gone backwards. So for Brazil, the team decided to revert back to the old spec car with the older upgrades, where they felt that they had a better understanding of how to get the most out of the package. And this ultimately proved the right call because both of their drivers qualified in the top four in Friday's qualifying session, with Alonso qualifying in P4 and Lance Stroll surprisingly qualifying in the top three. So already it was pretty clear that Aston had returned to form and that running the old spec car was the best way for it to go. We know the team admitted that it went in the wrong direction in terms of car development as the season went on, where the calculations and simulations that it was getting from the wind tunnel ultimately led to it going down the wrong path and led to this slump in form mid-season. So we already knew that Aston's one-lap pace was strong, but the big question was, could they carry this into the race? Was their race pace going to be as strong? Could they stick with the front runners and actually get a big result and score a lot of points? And this proved the case. In the sprint race, although Alonso and Stroll qualified down the order, the way that Alonso was working his way through the pack was a demonstration of just how competitive Aston were over the weekend at Interlagos, and he managed to carry this into the race as he ran in the top three for the majority of the Grand Prix. Although his pace clearly was not strong enough to match Verstappen and Norris out front, Alonso ran in a comfortable third place for the majority of the race and was often pulling away from the cars behind. It was only in the last 10 laps or so where Sergio Perez really put him under pressure. Alonso shouldn't really been given much of a chance against Perez because we know just how strong the Red Bull car is. It is one of the greatest cars ever designed in the history of Formula 1, particularly as it is so slippery and quick in a straight line, particularly with its clever DRS trick, which although we don't have as much an advantage now that other teams have caught up in this area, is still strong enough for it to be a real handful to keep behind. It was in these last 10 laps or so where Alonso's defensive masterclass really took shape and showed just how good a driver he is, even when he looks as though his back is against the wall and he has no hope of keeping the position, despite the fact he's got a car that is clearly not as strong as the driver he is fighting. Perez was within Alonso's DRS range for lap after lap in the closing stages, and yet he could not get close enough to make a move because Alonso was placing his car perfectly on the apex. He was deploying his battery on the straights tactically, and he was also taking different lines, particularly at the final corner, where he would try and upset the balance and the aerodynamics of Perez's car. It was these tactics that ultimately proved key in Alonso coming out on top in the battle, because it really meant that Perez was unable to get close enough to attack him and try and make a move, until obviously he did make his move on the penultimate lap. But before that, it shows just how amazing Alonso's mental capacity is, that he's driving at 200 miles an hour with a faster car behind him, and he's able to think about which lines he needs to take, where he needs to deploy his battery, where he needs to place the car in order for Perez not to get a sniff of a chance to overtake him. Ultimately, it's only the best drivers that can really pull this off by both driving really fast and having the mental capacity to think about other things that are going on in the race. But it did look as though Alonso's brave defence was not going to be rewarded with a podium when Perez finally managed to get close enough to make a lunge into turn one and get past into third place. Alonso even admitted after the race that when Perez managed to get past him, that he thought the podium was now gone because he expected the Red Bull probably just to pull away. But Fernando did not give up there, because he knew that if he could stay close enough to Perez going on to the final lap, he would have two chances to overtake him with the DRS both into turn one and into turn four. And this is exactly what happened. Although he wasn't close enough into turn one, he managed to make Perez take a defensive line into the first chicane at the centre S, and that meant that Perez was slower coming out of the centre S, and this ultimately led to Alonso having more momentum and a better run out of the centre S, where he was able to deploy the DRS down to turn 4 and make a brave move around the outside of Perez to take the place with a late move under braking. And Fernando just managed to hold on to the third place to score his 8th podium of 2023, despite the fact that Perez had a great run off the final corner, and with the help of DRS he only just missed out on reclaiming the position at the finish line. The two were only separated by 5/100ths of a second. It's this kind of performance that only underlines Alonso's brilliance, and it's not the first time that he's been put in this position where he's had to defend from a faster car behind him, and it drew comparisons with two drives in particular, Imola 2005 and Hungary 2021, where he had to hold off Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton for lap after lap. In the first case, he was battling for the victory, whereas against Hamilton, he was only fighting for 5th position, but it proved key in helping his teammate at the time, Esteban Ocon, take his maiden Grand Prix victory. But the reason they're all so comparable is Alonso's defensive driving and car placement in all of these cases, where he was able to hold off Schumacher, Hamilton and Perez in very similar circumstances and in a similar fashion, using clever driving to know where they were stronger than him, where they were likely to have more of an advantage and have a greater chance to try and overtake him. He was able to process and understand the situation firsthand, and therefore know exactly what he needed to do in order to stay in front. The only real key difference between all three of them is that in the first case at Imola 2005, when Alonso was defending against Schumacher, is that Schumacher did not have DRS to try and get past Alonso, because DRS obviously had not been invented yet. It wasn't part of that era. This was 6 years before Formula One actually introduced the DRS system. And given how much quicker that Schumacher was than Alonso, at times he was 2 seconds a lap quicker. That's why he caught him at such a rate of knots. If he'd had the DRS, it's likely that he would have breezed past. And I think this is why Alonso said after the race his defence against Perez was much harder than it was against Schumacher, because obviously back then in 2005 they did not have the DRS. So that's how Alonso managed to pull off what looked an impossible task, and it came at a perfect time, because going into the weekend in Brazil there were a lot of rumours surfacing on social media about his future, both in Formula One and at Aston Martin. Fernando was pretty miffed about all of the speculation about him on social media, and he even threatened that there would be consequences for those who had started these rumours. But I think for me this categorically rules out any chance of him walking away from Formula One again or moving teams. I think this ultimately proves just how much faith he has in Aston Martin, that they will give him a car that's competitive, whether that's in 2024 or maybe even 2025 if he decides to take up the option for a 3rd year. Because now that Aston's come out of the other side of the mid-season slump that it went through and reverted back to the old spec car that they know is the car that they understand the most, they can get that they managed to extract the maximum performance from, and where ultimately they were most competitive at most of the tracks, particularly earlier in the season. So now that they've got their heads around this problem, they now have a baseline for their 2024 car where they can take everything they've learned from this year and all of the mistakes that they've made and make sure that their 2024 car is more refined and ultimately more competitive. So now I want to hear what your thoughts are on Fernando Alonso's performance at the Brazilian Grand Prix. Do you think it was one of his best drives in Formula One? And do you think it was as good as Imola 2005 and Hungary 2021? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. And also don't forget to leave a like on the video and to subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate your continued support. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.